In 1945, 5 siblings disappeared during a suspicious house fire. No bodies, no answers. Decades later, a cryptic photo surfaced. Were they kidnapped? Or is the truth darker than anyone imagined?
Your goddamn house is going up in smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed. You're going to be paid for the dirty remarks you have been making about Mussolini." End quote.
It was the night before Christmas, December 24th, 1945. And while most American families were celebrating warmth, laughter, and togetherness, in Fayetteville, West Virginia, a tragedy was silently unfolding. A tragedy that would go on to haunt a family, divide investigators, and puzzle true crime enthusiasts for decades to come. The Sodder family, composed of George and Jennie Sodder, and their 10 children, were nestled in for the holiday in their modest 2-story frame house. The Christmas tree was lit, gifts were stacked beneath it, and 5 of the children, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie, and Betty, were given special permission to stay up late and play with their toys, excited and restless like most children on Christmas Eve. Sometime between midnight and 1 a.m., Jennie Sodder was awakened by a strange phone call. The voice on the other end asked for someone Jennie didn't know. In the background, she could hear the sound of laughter and clinking glasses, suggesting a party. When she told the caller they had the wrong number, the woman laughed strangely before hanging up. That call would be the last moment of normalcy the Sodder family would ever know. Moments later, Jennie noticed the lights were still on downstairs, and the curtains weren't drawn. Odd, considering the children were told to take care of those things before bed. As she descended the stairs, she found everything quiet. She turned off the lights, pulled the curtains shut, and assumed the children had gone to bed in the attic. She returned to her room and fell asleep. Less than 30 minutes later, she was jarred awake by the unmistakable sound of something hitting the roof with a loud thump, followed by a rolling noise, then silence, then smoke. Flames erupted through the walls of the house, and by the time George and Jennie realized what was happening, their home was rapidly being consumed. Panic set in. They grabbed the children closest to them. 4 escaped. But 5, the ones who had stayed up late, were trapped upstairs. George frantically tried to reach them, but the staircase was already engulfed in flames. He then rushed outside to grab the ladder that was always kept by the house, but it was gone. Not misplaced. Not fallen. Gone. Desperate, George broke a window to re-enter the house, but was driven back by smoke and heat. He attempted to pull his trucks up to the house, intending to climb them to the attic windows. But neither of his coal delivery trucks, both of which had worked perfectly the day before, would start. He would later insist that they had been tampered with. Inside the home, the screams of his children were never heard. The fire department, which was volunteer-based at the time, didn't arrive until nearly 8 hours later, long after the house had burned to ashes. Despite the intensity of the fire, no bones were found in the debris, not even a single fragment. The official conclusion from the authorities was that the 5 children had perished in the blaze, but the Sodders refused to accept it, and they had their reasons. Jennie, a mother clinging to faith, tried to rationalize the impossibility of 5 children vanishing without a trace. She conducted her own experiments, burning bones of different animals in the stove to see if they would completely disintegrate in flames of similar heat. They never did. She also spoke with a crematorium worker who confirmed that even bodies burned for over 2 hours at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit left behind bones. The house fire had lasted just 45 minutes and could not have reached those temperatures. So why were there no remains? As questions multiplied, so did the inconsistencies. The telephone line to the house had been cut, deliberately. A man who worked for the telephone company confirmed that it wasn't destroyed by the fire, but snipped. A neighbor reported seeing a man stealing something from the Sodders' property that night. Another local said they saw a group of men working on the Sodders' trucks before the fire. Yet none of these reports seemed to matter to local law enforcement, who quickly closed the case as a tragic accident. But to George and Jennie Sodder, nothing about that night felt like an accident. They believed that someone had set their home ablaze deliberately and had taken their children. Whether for ransom, revenge, or something even more sinister, they didn't know. But their determination to find the truth would launch them into a decades-long search that defied logic, confounded officials, and drew the attention of everyone from private investigators to conspiracy theorists. And while most would assume the tragedy ended with the ashes of that house, it didn't. It was only just beginning, because the deeper they dug, the darker the story became. One woven with mafia threats, mysterious sightings, and a single photo that would reignite the mystery decades later. A photo so chilling, so cryptic, that it would send the Sodder family into another spiral of desperate hope and painful uncertainty. In the next episode, we'll explore George Sodder's shadowy past, including his bitter feud with members of the local Italian mafia, and a warning he received just weeks before the fire that would send chills down his spine. Was the blaze a message, a punishment, or part of a much larger, more orchestrated plan? What happened to the Sodder children on that quiet Christmas night in 1945? Did they burn? Or did someone want the world to think they did? The weeks following the fire were filled not only with sorrow and confusion, but with a growing sense of fear, an invisible weight that hung over George and Jennie Sodder like smoke that never cleared. While the world around them was ready to move on, the Sodders were not. They were not only mourning the loss of 5 children, but trying to unravel a terrifying question. What if their children were not dead? What if they had been taken? To understand why the Sodders refused to believe the official version, we have to go back to the past George Sodder tried to leave behind, and to the enemies that may have followed him to his new life. George Sodder, originally Giorgio Sodder, was born in Tula, Sardinia in 1895 and immigrated to the United States as a teenager. He eventually settled in West Virginia, where he worked his way up from railroad laborer to successful businessman, owning his own trucking company. By the 1940s, the Sodders were considered a respected and prosperous family in Fayetteville. But despite his success, George was known to be outspoken, particularly about one very powerful man, Benito Mussolini. In the 1940s, anti-Italian sentiment was already high in America, but George took it one step further. He had no patience for fascism or dictatorship, and he voiced his disdain for Mussolini loudly and often, even among other Italian immigrants. some of whom still harbored loyalty to the regime back in Italy. This outspokenness created rifts in the community. There were arguments, tense silences. People began to turn cold toward him. Then came the threats. Weeks before the fire, a stranger came to the Sodder home under the pretense of looking for work. George, always willing to help fellow Italians, welcomed the man and spoke with him briefly. But then the stranger pointed to a pair of fuse boxes attached to the house and said something that, at the time, seemed bizarre. He warned George, "This place is going to go up in smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed." It was such an odd comment that George brushed it off, just a strange man with stranger words. But after the fire, those words returned, chilling and clear. Another visitor, a traveling insurance salesman, stopped by a few days later and became angry when George declined to buy his policy. In a heated moment, he told George bluntly, "Your goddamn house is going up in smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed. You're going to be paid for the dirty remarks you have been making about Mussolini." That threat, too, would later be dismissed by investigators as unrelated, but it lingered in George's memory like a wound that never closed. George began to suspect that his political opinions had made him a target, not just of resentment, but of something much darker. The more he dug, the more he was drawn into rumors surrounding the Italian mafia, whispers that some members of the local Italian-American community were still closely tied to organized crime back in New York and New Jersey. Could George have crossed the wrong people with his fierce anti-fascist views? Could they have retaliated in the most unthinkable way possible, by taking his children? The idea of mafia involvement may sound far-fetched to some, but there are details in this case that suggest a kind of calculated cruelty, not the randomness of a simple house fire. For example, the removal of the ladder from its usual place, the cutting of the phone line, and the disabling of both of George's trucks all point to an orchestrated effort. And what better night to carry it out than Christmas Eve, when distractions were high, when late-night visitors wouldn't raise suspicion, and when chaos would delay response times from volunteer firefighters. George and Jennie became obsessed with uncovering the truth. They hired private investigators. They posted billboards across the state with photos of their missing children. And they offered a $5,000 reward, later increased to $10,000, for any information that would lead to answers. Still, nothing concrete ever surfaced, until one day, more than 2 decades later, an envelope arrived in the mail that would change everything. The postmark read, Central City, Kentucky. There was no return address. Inside was a single photograph, an image of a young man who bore an eerie resemblance to Louis Sodder, who had vanished in the fire at just 9 years old. On the back of the photo was scrawled a cryptic message in strange handwriting. Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie. Lil boys, a 90132 or 35. The Sodders were shaken. The resemblance was undeniable. The cryptic nature of the note only deepened the mystery. Who sent this photo? Why? And what did the strange string of numbers and words even mean? Was it a code, a cry for help, or a cruel prank? In the next episode, we'll dive deep into the photo that gave Jennie a new surge of hope, the handwriting analysis that suggested the note was anything but random, and the investigation that followed, one that led the Sodders down winding back roads and into dangerous territory, all in pursuit of a face that might belong to their lost son. The question loomed heavier than ever. If Louis survived, where were the others? And perhaps even more disturbing, who was keeping them from coming home? By the late 1960s, the Sodder family had endured more than 2 decades of endless questions, dead ends, and aching silence. For George and Jennie Sodder, the grief of losing 5 children was only compounded by the unbearable uncertainty of not knowing how, or even if, they had died. The world had moved on, but the Sodders remained suspended in time, building their lives around a hole that never filled. Then, in 1968, something arrived in their mailbox that would reopen wounds, reignite hope, and complicate the mystery in ways no one could have predicted. It was a simple envelope, aged around the corners, with no return address. The postmark was from Central City, Kentucky. Inside was a single photograph, unremarkable at first glance, until George and Jennie turned it over and saw the young man staring back. His eyes were dark and deep-set, his hair thick and swept neatly to the side. He looked to be in his 20s, maybe early 30s. But what struck them most was how much he resembled their missing son, Louis. The resemblance wasn't casual, it was haunting. Jennie reportedly dropped the photo and began to tremble, convinced she was staring into the face of the boy she'd last seen when he was just 9 years old, smiling near a Christmas tree the night everything changed. And on the back of the photograph, scribbled in rough, uneven handwriting, were the words, "Louis Sodder. I love brother Frankie. Elil boys, a 90132 or 35. The message was as baffling as it was chilling. Who was Frankie? What did Elil boys mean? Were a 90132 or 35 some kind of postal codes, identification numbers, or coordinates? The message seemed coded, like someone trying to say more than they could safely express. It wasn't just a note. It was a riddle wrapped in fear. The Sodders were gripped by this strange new hope. Was Louis alive? Had he grown up under another name, another life, far from West Virginia? Was he trying to reach out, but couldn't say more? They immediately hired another private investigator, this time to trace the photo's origin. The man's name was C.C. Tinsley, and he agreed to travel to Central City, Kentucky, to dig into the mysterious clue. He left, promising to report back with any information he could gather. But he never returned. Not to the Sodders, not to anyone. C.C. Tinsley vanished without a trace. No follow-up report, no phone call, no letter. He simply disappeared, swallowed by the same shadow that had haunted this case since the beginning. Whether he abandoned the case or something more sinister happened, no one ever found out. But to the Sodders, it was just one more ghost on a list that kept growing. Still, the photo became central to their lives. They made copies. They enlarged it. They had handwriting experts study the scrawl on the back, hoping to decipher its true meaning. The analysis came back with a strange result. The handwriting didn't match that of any known family member, and experts couldn't conclusively determine whether the note had been written by someone under duress or simply uneducated. It was a dead end, wrapped in a beacon of hope. But for Jennie Sodder, a mother whose grief had grown roots deep in her soul, the photo was more than a clue. It was a lifeline. She had it framed and hung it in her hallway, right beside the billboards the family had created over the years, pleading with the world for answers. Every day, Jennie would walk past the face in the photo. She would look into those eyes she swore were Lewis's, and wonder, was he out there? Was he safe? Did he remember them? The mystery of the photograph breathed new life into old questions. And with that life came renewed tips, calls from strangers, and more leads that seemed promising, but never brought answers. A woman in St. Louis said she once saw children being taken away in the middle of the night by two men. Another report came from Florida. An elderly man claimed he had seen the children with an unfamiliar couple who refused to let them speak. None of it could be verified. All of it added to the storm. Some theorized that the children had been kidnapped and sold into adoption rings, possibly trafficked and given new identities, a fate not uncommon in that era when oversight was minimal and records were often altered or falsified. Others believed the children had been raised by relatives or complicit guardians who had some connection to George's past enemies. Still others feared that, after being taken, the children had been threatened or brainwashed into silence. But the photograph, that photo, remained the closest thing to evidence the Sodders had ever received. As time passed, the family grew older. George died in 1969, just a year after receiving the photo, taking his unanswered questions with him. Jennie lived on, wearing black for the rest of her life as a symbol of her grief and unresolved pain. She died in 1989, still without closure. Yet the mystery remained. Who sent the photo? Was the man in the picture really Lewis? Or was this one final cruel twist in a story filled with torment? As the years stretched into decades, the Sodder family's desperate search never waned. Though the flames of that 1945 Christmas Eve had long since gone cold, the embers of mystery remained, smoldering in the hearts of those left behind. With no remains found, no official answers given, and only a cryptic photo offering a flicker of possibility, the case drew theories from every corner, some rooted in fact, others in speculation, but all born from the same aching question. What really happened to the Sodder children? One of the most compelling theories came from eyewitnesses, people scattered across the country who claimed, independently and over many years, that they had seen the children alive after the fire. In the days immediately following the blaze, a woman working at a roadside tourist stop reported seeing the 5 children in a car with unknown adults. She said she tried to speak to them, but the adults quickly shut the interaction down. Weeks later, another woman, running a hotel in Charleston, West Virginia, claimed to have seen 4 of the children, 2 boys and 2 girls, accompanied by 2 Italian-looking men and women. They registered under a false name and left in the middle of the night. There were also whispers that the children had been sent to Italy, perhaps hidden away by distant family or old-world enemies who still held grudges from George's vocal criticism of Mussolini. Could the children have been raised overseas, completely unaware of their true identities? Could they have been so young, so frightened, that they grew up believing their real family had perished in that fire? Some speculated that the children had indeed survived the fire, but were taken as part of a revenge plot, possibly orchestrated by organized crime figures George had offended. If the mafia was involved, it would explain the silence, the fear, and even the cryptic clues that surfaced over the years. A child raised under threat, coached from a young age, could be made to believe anything, especially if the alternative was punishment or death. Then there were darker theories. Some believed the children were victims of child trafficking, taken in the chaos of the fire and placed in homes far away under different names. If that were true, it might explain why no contact ever came from them, even into adulthood. Maybe they never knew who they were. Maybe they had been silenced. Or maybe they were too ashamed to return, afraid of what they might discover or reveal. And then, of course, there's the simplest theory, that the children perished in the fire and the lack of physical evidence was just an unfortunate consequence of a rare and extreme circumstance. That everything, the photo, the sightings, the whispers, was coincidence or desperate hope clinging to fading memories. But for those who followed this case closely, that answer never quite satisfies. Too many things went wrong that night. Too many details didn't make sense. A ladder that vanished, trucks that wouldn't start, a phone line cut, a strange thump on the roof, and 5 children who seemingly vanished into smoke without a trace. Not even a bone, not even a button. And through it all, a mother's endless hope remained. Jennie Sodder, who walked past that mysterious photograph every day until the end of her life, never stopped believing that somewhere, somehow, her children were out there, waiting to be found. Maybe hidden, maybe afraid, but alive. Today, nearly 8 decades later, the story of the Sodder children still stands as one of the most chilling and perplexing unsolved mysteries in American history. It's a puzzle with missing pieces, scattered across time and memory, scattered across whispers and photographs, across rumors and dead ends. And perhaps it always will be. So what do you believe? Was it a tragic accident that left behind only questions? Was it revenge from enemies hiding in plain sight? Or was it a twisted rescue? A stolen future reimagined under false names and foreign skies? Comment below and tell us your theory. Do you believe the Sodder children survived? Or do you think the truth was buried in the ashes long ago? If this haunting story moved you or made you pause and think, please like the video, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel for more deeply researched true crime mysteries. Don't forget to click the bell icon so you never miss our next release. Because stories like this one, they're never really over.